Tony Benn famously asked, "What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interests do you use it? To whom are you accountable? And how do we get rid of you?" He ended by saying that anyone who can't answer the last of those questions does not live in a democratic system. I found these questions to be a useful starting point in thinking about my contribution to this morning's debate. And they've helped me think consciously about the role of funders, and particularly the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, the why we choose to invest in work to increase access and participation in the arts, and the challenge of deciding where to place our investment. At Davos in 2016, the artist Oliver Eliasson wrote, "Art does not show people what to do, yet engaging with a good work of art can connect you to your senses, your body, and your mind. It can make the world felt, and this felt feeling may spur thinking, engagement, and even action." And I think this is right. It's not a precondition that art is made to change the world, and indeed imposing such a precondition would take it from a work of art to propaganda, and arguably that's less effective in its power to move. But many artists do feel a responsibility, a need to make work that responds to injustice or to world events. The power of Picasso's Guernica, depicting the futility of war crosses cultural divides with its violent imagery. The impact of Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday in reinforcing the rage that drove the American civil rights movement. The words of Maya Angelou that Michelle Obama said taught all women that self-worth has nothing to do with what the world might say. And Jeremy Deller's We're Here, which connected 63% of the adult UK population to a nation's reflection about the Battle of the Somme. All of these are good and powerful examples of what I'm talking about. So my assertion this morning is that the arts do have power to change the lives of individuals and potentially to change systems and structural power dynamics by insisting the world doesn't have to be like this. Things can be different. Art changes people and people change the world. And if I hold this belief to be true, then perhaps despite what the two previous speakers have said, opening up access to the arts is in itself a political and powerful act, one of social justice, that assumes that the arts are not a privilege, but a right. There can be a relationship between culture and change. And I'm also asserting that power is not only a force of oppression and control, it can also be a force of creation and liberation, especially if that power is acknowledged and the control ceded in some way. In such case, perhaps power becomes empowering. So the question then is, what barriers might there be in place, and how might we, as a funder, support their removal to ensure that access to the arts is as equitable as possible, and that the organisations we fund are mindful of the inherent power dynamics at play? All the data shows that there is a significant overrepresentation in the cultural sector from those from affluent middle-class social backgrounds and underrepresentation of those from working-class social origins, as well as exclusions based on gender, ethnicity, and education. The lack of diverse leadership in the sector is not just a consideration from the point of view of representation and what it says to others thinking of joining our sectors. It also means that the content and narratives for creative expression, for voice, are potentially shaped by other more dominant narratives, which I think is partly what Joe was talking about as well. And in the worst cases, shut people out from experiencing the power that art and creativity can unleash in them. At Paul Hamlyn Foundation, then, we support leadership development at all levels, in schools, in cultural organisations, in networks and movements such as What Next and the Cultural Learning Alliance. This cannot be a tokenistic approach. The well-meaning but short-term initiatives have to be replaced by sustained long-term investment and by an appreciation that this is a much bigger issue than our sector alone. Higher education policies, I didn't know you were going to talk about that. Industrial strategies have their impact, and so does personal action. If you aren't signed up as a Speaker for Schools candidate, why not? If you aren't asking questions of your board representation, you should be. It also follows that the attitudes and outlooks of current cultural workers may be at odds with part of the population, which is what Jeremy talked about. How many of us were caught unawares by the strength of feelings expressed through the Brexit campaigns, and how many have since asked why we were so surprised? If we believe that in art we can create the space for disagreement and embrace difference, we should be able to, and this is Olafur Eliasson's words again, transcend the polarising popularism and stigmatisation of other people, positions and worldviews that's so sadly endemic in public discourse today. But we have to let those other voices in the first place. So as a funder, we say it's not enough to talk about numbers anymore. You must be able to demonstrate an understanding of the needs of your existing and potential audiences and participants, by which we mean you must have a relationship that extends beyond the transactional, and a strong rationale as to how the work you want funded will address that need. In a recent blog, the wonderful Francois Matarazzo said, "I have never delivered a community art project. I'm not a milkman, quietly placing a healthy pint on strangers' doorsteps. Community arts does not give you calcium. I only want to share a part of my journey with someone who wants the same." So there's a question of tone here as well, and how we assess that. The principle of not entering into people's lives without invitation. The need to fight against our natural instinct to bestow the benefits of the arts in an act of middle-class munificence. The recognition that the ability to resist your and my ideas, counter our suggestions, or veto decisions is an important type of relationship power for our audiences and participants. So Jeremy is right. We are explicit as a funder in our desire to see the balance of power shift, and we want to see artists use their power too. We want to see active participants and partnerships with communities, and that requires an organisation-wide approach. It's no longer the domain for us of the education or outreach department alone. We expect to see it translated into the way you use your venue, your marketing, your governance. And all of that's well and good, but it's not without its challenges. There is an issue of geography which we're still grappling with. It's much easier to make grants to established organisations than it is to new ones, and much harder in areas of low cultural infrastructure, which are, unsurprisingly, also areas of low cultural engagement, and areas, incidentally, which are demonstrating a tendency to support the populist voice we are currently hearing. So the preparedness of the funder to travel and to take risk is paramount. There is a concern for us about the type of art that we support. Our US partners in the migration space, Unbound Philanthropy, are in the initial stages of creating a pooled fund in America dedicated to pop culture and social change, with the stated intention of harnessing and influencing pop culture, and with the goal of, and these are their words, improving public opinion and behaviour towards migrants, people of colour, and other strategic constituencies. Their argument is that to achieve real change, social change, you need to be working at scale and with culture that has the potential to reach. We don't currently fund TV, film, pop music, comedy, but it's got me thinking that perhaps we should. And there is a reality of complexity and other forces at play. In talking about social change, we're largely talking here about complex social challenges, situations in which the complexity of people's real lives matter, which involve multiple ever-changing stakeholders, and that's really tricky stuff. Our perspective of individual or institutional power in this context may shrink. It's hard to focus effort and keep up morale if it feels as though one is hammering a head against a very large and intractable wall. And we also have to recognise the strains that this lived experience can have on our potential audiences and participants. Jeremy's provocation made me think about who else and what other sectors are in powerful forces in the lives of people who have less opportunity at the moment, and what role the arts play in working alongside those sectors. This is cropping up more and more in our applications, and reflects learning from our own programmes, our museum, and to a certain extent, youth sector partnerships across the Tate Circuit programme. Art at the Old Fire Station's partnership with Crisis is a really good example of this. Battersea Arts Centre's proposal to become a theatre of sanctuary is another. And I just wondered if we're really alert to the possibility that this sector is potentially much more powerful when it works in collaboration rather than in isolation. I have a feeling that the fire station is an exception rather than the rule in our current cultural setup. So in 10 minutes, I can do little more than start the conversation. And the act of writing this has certainly been provoking for me, so I hope it has been for you a little bit. I'd sum up with a few last thoughts. As artists and arts organisations, you undoubtedly do have power. You may dispute that, and it'll be interesting to see where the conversation goes. But I would state that you do. And you have choices about how you exercise that power. To me, the sharing of power seems to be the non-negotiable in this conversation, founded on a deep respect for those that influence and, in some cases, co-create art. In order to make that real, we need to see an approach to equality and social justice that is embedded in the vision, the leadership, the business on stage and off in all aspects of an arts organisation's work. And in the end, it's much more about a set of values and behaviours that translate into action than it is about fulfilling the requirements of a funding application. Thank you very much for having me.